It started with something so small, so innocent, that it didn't even register until much later. Like the way your favorite song from youth creeps into your head on a random Tuesday, uninvited, yet oddly comforting. I was folding laundry. A pile of cotton underwear, faded bras with stretched out bands, and Mark's always too stiff button-downs lay between me and the muted flicker of the TV. I remember I had paused halfway through an episode of some mindless crime show, something with low-budget suspense and too much saxophone. I wasn't paying attention. I rarely did anymore.
The doorbell rang. Twice.
Short bursts. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on my sweatpants and went to the door. He stood there, one hand braced against the doorframe, the other holding a duffel bag. He was older than I remembered, taller, broader. The last time I'd seen him was at his father's second wedding, nearly a decade ago. Back then, he was gangly, sharp-edged, all Adam's apple and awkward charm.
Now, he was a man.
Ava, he said with a grin that tugged at one side of his mouth, just the way his father used to. Long time. I blinked, and for a moment, my brain scurried around trying to place the face with the voice. Then it clicked. Jason. He nodded. Stepbrother Jason. Don't hold it against me. I laughed before I realized how tightly I'd been gripping the doorknob. He hugged me, and it should have been innocent. It was innocent, but his arm lingered a second longer than necessary, and I noticed how his hand pressed into the small of my back. Firm. Comfortable. Mark had mentioned something briefly over dinner weeks ago. Jason was back from Europe, freelancing now between gigs, needed a place to crash for a while. It'll just be a week, he'd said. Maybe two. He forgot to mention that Jason was no longer a boy. That night, after we finished a lazy dinner and Mark retreated to his usual evening ritual, a beer, a recliner, and ESPN, I caught Jason watching me in the kitchen as I loaded the dishwasher. His eyes weren't leering, not exactly. Just present. Alert. Like I was something more than background noise. I remember you used to hum when you cooked, he said. You don't anymore. I paused, plate in hand. You remember that? I asked, amused and vaguely touched. He shrugged. You were always humming something. Fleetwood Mac, I think. Or maybe Joni Mitchell. He was right. I hadn't realized I'd stopped. The next few days passed in a blur of careful choreography. We avoided each other in that polite way house guests and hosts do. He helped out, folded laundry without asking, brought me coffee when he sensed I needed it. He called me Ava, not sis, which I was grateful for. And when he looked at me, really looked, I felt something in my stomach shift. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. It was awareness. It was the way his eyes met mine across the dinner table, steady and quiet. It was the way he stood too close behind me when we both reached for the same cabinet. It was the way I suddenly felt alive again, in a house where everything had felt so still for years. Mark and I weren't unhappy, not exactly. We were functional. We shared a mortgage, a history, and a calendar synced to dentist appointments. Our last real vacation had been over 4 years ago, and the last time he'd touched me in a way that made my breath hitch, I couldn't remember. Jason was like a song from my youth, a little out of place, a little too loud, but impossible to ignore. One evening, after Mark had gone to bed with his usual mumble about early morning meetings, I found Jason in the kitchen again, barefoot, shirtless, drinking wine from a mug. He looked up at me and smiled. You're always up late, he said. So are you. We stood in silence for a beat too long. You ever think about leaving? He asked quietly, his gaze somewhere over my shoulder. Leaving what? I asked, even though I already knew.
This, he said.
Suburbia.
Predictability.
Being the person everyone expects you to be. I stared at him, my mouth dry. I think about it, I said. But thinking and doing. He stepped closer. Not threatening, just near. I could smell the wine on his breath. The faint warmth of his skin. You don't look like a woman who's done living, he said. And then he kissed me. It wasn't hungry. Not at first. His lips were soft, uncertain, waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. I let the mug slip from my fingers into the sink behind me. I let him lean in, his hand brushing my waist, my hip, the swell of my thigh. I let his mouth trail down my neck, and I shivered in a way I hadn't in years.
We didn't go to his room that night.
We didn't even make it to the couch. I let him lift me onto the kitchen counter, the cool marble shocking against the back of my thighs. He tugged my sleep shirt over my head with a reverence that made me ache, and when his mouth found my breast, slow, patient, I heard myself moan, and didn't care who heard. There's a kind of intimacy that doesn't come from love. It comes from need, from recognition, from being seen. He made me feel young again, but not naive. Desired, but not used. When he moved inside me, I gasped, not from the act, but from the realization that I'd forgotten how it felt to be touched like this. Afterward, we stayed there for a while, our breaths slowly sinking. The kitchen smelled like coffee and sweat and old wood. The light above the stove hummed quietly.
He didn't speak.
Neither did I. The next morning, I made breakfast like nothing had happened. Scrambled eggs.
Toast.
Black coffee. Mark kissed my cheek and told me he'd be late from work. Jason met my eyes across the table, and for a moment, the air was thick. But he didn't say anything. He just smiled. And that smile said everything. I wasn't sure what I expected the next time.
Shame, maybe.
Regret. A gnawing guilt that would burrow into my chest and refuse to let go. But when I woke up the next morning, all I felt was clarity. A silence inside me that didn't ache anymore. That surprised me more than anything. I watched Mark tie his tie in the hallway mirror. He didn't even glance at me. We'd lived together for 22 years, and I knew the rhythm of his movements better than I knew the lines on my own face. The way he tugged the knot 3 times. The half step back to check his reflection. The subtle flex of his jaw when the collar didn't sit right. It was comforting, in a way, this repetition. But it was also exactly why I hadn't said no to Jason. Comfort can rot, if left untouched long enough. When Mark left for work, Jason didn't emerge right away. I found him eventually in the backyard, barefoot in the dewy grass, shirtless again, sipping coffee and watching birds hop along the fence. His hair was a mess, but there was a calmness in his face I hadn't noticed before. "Sleep okay?" asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He looked over his shoulder, one brow raised. "You're really going to pretend we didn't do what we did last night?" I smiled, despite myself. "What do you want me to say?" He turned fully, his chest lean but strong, a faint scar just below his collarbone that I hadn't noticed before. "I don't want you to say anything. I just don't want you to lie to yourself." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. He walked toward me, slow, deliberate, like he knew the effect each step had on me. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about the way you looked," he said, voice low, intimate. "On that counter. Your skin in the moonlight. Your breath catching in my ear." I felt warmth flood through me, deep, rich, and entirely inappropriate for 9 in the morning. "You shouldn't say things like that," I whispered. "But you liked it," he said, brushing a hand along my wrist. "Didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next time, it was in the laundry room. The dryer rumbled quietly beside us, the scent of clean fabric and Jason's sweat mixing into something dizzying. I had gone in to collect towels. He had followed me without a word. He pressed me against the door, one hand fisting in my hair, the other sliding beneath my shirt with a heat that made my knees weak. I didn't stop him. My body had missed this urgency, this recklessness. His tongue found my ear as he murmured things I hadn't heard in over a decade. He told me I was beautiful, that I tasted like summer, that he wanted to feel me come around him again and again. He made me beg.
And I did.
With shaking hands, I undid his jeans. He pulled my panties aside, didn't even bother taking them off. I gasped as he filled me, each thrust a wave crashing through the numbness I hadn't even known was there. We finished against the dryer, the hum of its cycle barely masking my cries. Afterward, I slumped against him, dizzy, disoriented. He kissed my temple and whispered, "I don't want this to be a secret you hate. I want it to be one that keeps you alive." I think I loved him a little for saying that. The days blurred into a rhythm, much like before, but this time with a pulse beneath the surface. Mark never noticed. He was busy with his own life. Meetings, deadlines, friends from the golf club. When he kissed me, it was on the forehead. When he touched me, it was accidental. I couldn't tell if it was my betrayal that numbed me to him, or if I had already been gone long before Jason ever arrived.
And Jason?
He didn't push. He didn't ask for promises. He didn't try to define us. He simply was. A pair of hands when I reached for something I couldn't carry. A mouth that found mine in dark hallways and behind closed doors. A voice that said my name like it meant something. We tried once to stop. He packed a bag, said maybe he'd head up the coast, maybe stay with an old friend in Portland. I helped him zip the duffel. Both of us quiet, both of us pretending this wasn't going to unravel us. He made it to the front door. I followed. By the time I reached him, I was shaking. "I can't breathe when you're gone," I said, not recognizing my own voice. He dropped the bag. And then we were on the stairs, half-clothed, desperate, as though trying to erase the space that had started to form between us. I came before he was even fully inside me. He followed, biting down on my shoulder, so hard I bore the bruise for days. Neither of us said another word about leaving after that. It wasn't just the sex. It was the way he saw me. One afternoon, I sat in the living room reading an old novel I hadn't touched in years. Jason walked in, shirt still damp from a shower, hair slicked back. He stopped when he saw me. "You look like someone's fantasy," he said. I rolled my eyes. "I mean it," he added, sitting down across from me. The quiet woman with the book and the faraway eyes. The kind of woman who's lived too much, but still wants more. My throat tightened. I wanted to cry and kiss him in the same breath. "You make me feel like I'm still in there," I said. "Like I'm not just someone's wife. Someone's mother. Someone's dinner maker." "You're not," he said, standing. He crossed the room and pulled me to my feet, kissing me slow, deep, until the book dropped from my fingers. "You're you, Ava," he whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed him.
But it wasn't all romance.
There were moments of doubt, cracks that widened in silence. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, tangled in sheets next to Mark, and feel the weight of what I was doing pressing on my chest like a stone. This wasn't just lust. This wasn't just a fling. This was a choice. A daily, dangerous choice. I'd lie there and think, what happens when Jason leaves for real? What happens if Mark finds out? What happens when this version of myself, the one who feels, aches, desires, no longer has a place to exist? But in the morning, Jason would kiss my wrist when I passed him the coffee. And my doubt would dissolve again. We found a rhythm. A secret symphony. We made love in the garage, in the guest bathroom, once even in the back seat of Mark's car while he was in the grocery store. It was madness. It was teenage and stupid and brilliant. But it was also fragile. And we both knew it. Sometimes, Jason would look at me like he wanted to say something deeper, something final. I'd catch him watching me when I cooked dinner, or brushed my hair, or laughed at something dumb on TV. His expression wasn't just lust. It was longing. And that scared me more than anything. Because the moment love entered the room, it would ruin everything. And I wasn't sure I could survive that kind of ruin again. It was the little things that began to change first. Jason started coming home later. He said he was looking at some freelance opportunities, spending time in cafes downtown, reconnecting with old creative friends. He spoke of them lightly, almost apologetically, but I could sense a restlessness behind his words. I told myself not to worry. We weren't supposed to belong to each other. We weren't even supposed to start. This had been an accident, a beautiful mistake I let happen over and over again. But still, I noticed. He smelled different sometimes, coffee and ink, maybe a hint of someone else's perfume clinging to his shirt. A woman's laughter in the background when he answered a call in the hallway and quickly stepped outside. I didn't say anything. What right did I have? After all, I went to bed beside my husband every night and kissed a man who wasn't him every afternoon. I was the one who blurred the lines. Still, something in me tightened every time I heard Jason's keys in the door later than usual. Something cold. Something territorial. One afternoon, after Mark had gone golfing and the house had that rare, suspended silence I used to crave, Jason came into the kitchen while I was chopping onions. I didn't turn around. He stood behind me, closer than he should have, but didn't touch me. "You're quiet," he said. "So are you," I replied, evenly. I could feel the weight of his stare on the back of my neck. "Did I do something?" he asked softly. That's what unraveled me. Not the question, but the sincerity in his voice. I dropped the knife, turned, and looked up at him. "You're slipping away," I said. "And I don't know what's worse, pretending not to notice, or begging you not to." Jason's face changed, not with guilt, but something like sadness. He stepped forward and placed both hands on either side of my waist. "I'm not slipping," he said. "I'm trying not to lose myself in you." I blinked, stunned. "I didn't mean for this to be permanent," he continued. "But Ava, you're all I think about. I hear you in songs. I see you in strangers. I'm scared I'll never want anything else again." I exhaled, slow. Something heavy loosened in my chest. Then he kissed me. Desperate, uncoordinated, too much teeth. We stumbled to the kitchen floor like teenagers, giggling into each other's mouths, tugging at clothing without grace or rhythm. It wasn't beautiful. It was real. When he came, he buried his face into my neck and whispered, "Don't send me away." "Not yet." And I knew I wouldn't. That weekend, Mark suggested a family dinner. Just the three of us. At home. "Old times," he said. I smiled. Agreed. Made lasagna. Jason came home early, cleaned up, wore a crisp gray button-down I hadn't seen before. He looked younger. Too young. I wondered, briefly, how he looked to Mark now, this lean, thoughtful man with quiet eyes and secrets behind them. We drank too much wine. Mark told stories Jason already knew, but laughed anyway. Jason watched me the entire meal, though subtly. Not the obvious kind of staring, but the kind you feel on your skin like a warm hand. When Mark went to bed, buzzed, fed, and unaware, Jason helped me with the dishes. We stood at the sink, the air between us thick with all the things we couldn't say. "Why do I feel like we're running out of time?" I asked. Jason dried a plate, then looked at me. "Because we are," he said. "Even fantasies start to crumble when you live in them too long." His honesty hurt more than anything else he'd ever said. The next few days were quiet. He was distant again. Not cold, but preoccupied. I tried not to ask questions. I tried not to fall apart. But something had shifted between us. We made love less often, but when we did, it was fierce. Like we were both trying to hold onto the edges of something unraveling. He would grip my hips hard enough to bruise, kiss me until my lips ached, press his forehead to mine when he finished, as though anchoring himself. One night, after it was over, he stayed lying on top of me longer than usual, breathing, listening. "I met someone," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. "She's not like you," he continued. "She's younger. Bright-eyed. She thinks I'm fascinating." I said nothing. He rolled off me, lay beside me, stared at the ceiling. "I haven't touched her," he added. "I don't know if I want to." I turned on my side and looked at him. "Then why are you telling me?" "Because I want you to tell me not to," he said. "I want you to say I'm yours." But I couldn't. Not with Mark asleep just down the hall.
So I stayed silent.
And Jason closed his eyes. The next morning he was gone. A note on the kitchen table, written in blocky, unsure handwriting. "Ava, I love you. That's the problem."
G.
I didn't cry right away. I finished the dishes, vacuumed, folded laundry. Mark noticed nothing. That night, when he rolled over and wrapped his arm around my waist in his sleep, I flinched. Not because I hated him, but because I felt nothing. The days stretched. I checked my phone obsessively, rereading old messages from Jason. I opened the cupboard where he used to hide his favorite cereal. I stood in the laundry room and touched the washing machine, remembering the way his breath felt against my neck. I tried to hate him for leaving. I failed. 3 weeks later, I saw him again. By accident. A bookstore. Rainy afternoon. I had ducked inside to kill time while waiting for a prescription. He was there, by the travel essays, flipping through something by Paul Thoreau. A woman stood beside him, laughing at something he said. She was pretty, casual, her hand on his forearm. He looked happy. He didn't see me, and I didn't let him. I walked out, back into the rain, blinking against the sting in my eyes. It wasn't regret. It was something deeper. The kind of ache that has no language. The kind that belongs to those who have tasted something forbidden and can never go back to ordinary. When I got home, Mark was mowing the lawn. I stood in the kitchen, still damp from the rain, and looked around at the house we'd built. The framed wedding photo, the vacation magnets, the dinner for two table. Then I walked to the bedroom, stripped, and looked at myself in the mirror. Not at my body, but at my face. There was something different in my eyes. I saw hunger, experience, memory. I saw the woman Jason had seen, and I didn't want to forget her. Not ever. Months passed, quietly, almost cruelly. There was no dramatic collapse, no shouting match, no broken glass or thrown suitcases. Just a slow fading of color, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. Jason didn't return, and I didn't chase him. At first, I thought the pain would soften, but it didn't. It changed shape, settled into places I didn't expect. My hands, my lower back, my throat when I tried to sing along to old songs in the car. But in a strange way, I welcomed it. It reminded me that I had felt something real, that I had been touched, deeply, honestly, even if the timing was wrong, even if the world we created was made of fragile, borrowed hours. Mark and I grew distant, though we never talked about it. He kept himself busy. Business dinners, golf tournaments, financial planning. We were polite, kind even, but hollow. Sex happened once, maybe twice, in those first few weeks after Jason left. Familiar, dutiful, and entirely disconnected. I let it happen. He never asked why I cried quietly in the bathroom afterward. I don't think he noticed. Or maybe he did, and he simply couldn't bear to confront what it meant. I started walking in the mornings. It began as a distraction, a way to fill the space Jason used to take up. But soon it became something else. A ritual. A reclamation. I'd leave just after sunrise, before the neighborhood really woke. The streets were empty. The air crisp. I liked the solitude. I liked the ache in my calves, the burning in my lungs. It reminded me that I was still here, still mine. Sometimes I walked past houses and imagined the people inside, the couples, the secrets they kept from each other, the longings they buried beneath mortgages and matching pajama sets. I wondered how many women were like me, quietly starving for something they couldn't even name. It was mid-March when I heard from him again. An email.
Short.
Simple.
Ava.
I hope this doesn't hurt you. I just wanted to say thank you for letting me see who you really are. I don't think I'll ever stop loving that version of you. Be good to her.
G.
I stared at the screen for a long time. My first impulse was to reply, to pour out everything I'd held back, to ask if he still thought of me when he closed his eyes, to tell him that some nights I woke up sweating, breathless, aching for the weight of his body on mine. But I didn't write back, because some goodbyes don't come with a second act. And maybe they shouldn't. Spring came slowly that year. I found myself watching the trees more, listening to birds, sitting with silence instead of running from it. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. The pages filled quickly, not with guilt, but with truths. I wrote about the way Jason made me feel when he said my name like it tasted good on his tongue. About the first time he kissed the inside of my knee and looked up at me like I was a prayer. About the part of me that still lit up when I thought of his breath against my collarbone. But I also wrote about the emptiness that followed. The weight of pretending. The unbearable sweetness of something doomed from the start. I didn't try to make it a lesson. Not all stories need morals.
Some just need space to exist.
I went away for a weekend in April. Alone. A small coastal town 2 hours north. I rented a room with a fireplace and a clawfoot tub. No schedule. No one to answer to. I walked the beach barefoot, bought fresh bread from a man with a crooked smile, read old poetry with a glass of wine in hand. One morning, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ocean, and I said his name out loud. Not with longing, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because loving Jason, even in secret, reminded me I was still a woman, still capable of hunger, of pleasure, of defiance. He woke me up, and I wasn't going back to sleep. When I returned home, Mark was waiting in the kitchen. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I just hadn't seen him in a long time. He didn't ask questions. He never had. But something passed between us in that quiet. A recognition. I think he knew. Maybe not the details, but enough. Enough to know I'd lived a life apart from him, even under the same roof. And instead of anger, there was sadness in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, pouring coffee into a mug. "I think we both forgot how to want each other." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He handed me the mug. Our fingers brushed. There was no reconciliation in it.
No fairita le healing.
Just two people acknowledging a slow, quiet truth they'd both been afraid to say out loud. A few months later, Jason's name came up at a family gathering. My sister-in-law asked casually if he was still living out west. I nodded. Probably charming the pants off someone, she laughed. I smiled politely, sipped my wine. She had no idea how literal that had been. The years moved on. I didn't remarry. Mark and I eventually separated, not in bitterness, but in peace. We divided our lives gently. There were no lawyers, just a shared understanding that we had done what we could, that we'd served each other well, until we didn't. I bought a little place not far from the coast, started painting again, took a cooking class, traveled alone. I found joy in unexpected things. A new book, a thunderstorm, the sound of seagulls in the morning. I also found quiet. Not loneliness. Quiet. The kind that feels earned. Sometimes, when I walk through the garden behind my house, I still think of him. I remember the way he used to hold my face after we made love. The way he whispered, "Stay here," like he meant forever, even if we both knew better. But I don't ache anymore. I remember him not as a regret, but as a reawakening. A chapter in my life where I learned how to feel again. Where I stopped waiting for permission to live. I once read that a woman's second life begins the day she stops apologizing for the first one.
I didn't understand it then, but I do now.
Jason was never mine to keep, but he was mine for a moment. And sometimes that's enough.